Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show, and we are super excited for today. I just met this incredible woman last week, I think. This was very, very recently. Was connected by another friend, and as soon as we started talking, I knew instantly, man, I want to have this woman on the podcast because she has so much life to share. And more importantly, for me and the purposes of this podcast, she's at a point where, at least for right now, she's decided who she wants to be and how she's going to move forward in her life. And I think that is a crucial and key point in somebody's life. And so I want to share that with the world because I see the value in how do you come to those decisions and what does that look like moving forward? And what's the difference in like living in somebody else's shadow versus choosing to step into your own light, your own power, and your own fulfillment and say, I'm here to show up as God made me and what my purpose is, rather than sitting in the background waiting for my turn. It's Tasha's turn. I'm excited. So her name is Tasha Skousen. She's an incredible entrepreneur. She's had a lot of life experience, has some wonderful children. She's a great mom. And I'm just excited for you guys to hear her story and about why she does what she does and how she does it. So Tasha, go ahead and introduce yourself. Start as early as you can and give us the details of where you are, how you got to where you are, and why you're so passionate about helping people moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam, for having me on. I'm grateful to be here. Grateful to share my story. I think my biggest life's mission is going to be, when you've dealt with something and you've been through something hard, you're supposed to help someone else through it. And so I'm grateful to be able to share that with you today. My name is Tasha Skousen. I am a serial entrepreneur. I am a mother and a child of God. And I have been through a lot in this life that has led me to be the person I am today, all of which I'm grateful for. I moved around a lot as a kid. I went to 13 different schools as a child. My mother had a philosophy that if something happened or there was a problem, that the solution was to move away from it, but it did always seem to follow. She was a single mom. My father was not in the picture with us at all. Definitely watched my mom work very hard to try and provide as best as she could. But unfortunately, addictions and things eventually got her, and she had to serve some time for decisions that she made, decisions that affected the rest of the family, and for their privacy, I won't share what happened. But I will say that those decisions caused me at a very young age to have to fend for myself, to learn to work hard. And on these moments where she wouldn't be home, she would leave the house for days and weeks at a time, leaving my sister and I to fend for ourselves. I'm about 4 years older than my sister. And this started when I was about 12 years old. And so she would leave us for, days and weeks at a time. And I remember I was in 9th grade, so I would have been 14 years old. And I had a little sister here who was 11 years old. And my mom had been gone for about 4 weeks at this point. No idea where she was. Lights started turning off in the house. So we would have, dinner by candlelight. And I would tell her, oh, we're just being romantic and try and make it light. And then the water got turned off. And so we would make it a game, and we would, lather up and go run through the neighbor's sprinklers to be able to shower in the morning. And then one day an officer came and asked us to leave the home. And so I remember thinking, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. I'm in ninth grade. I don't know how to take care of my sister. And so I remember gathering up as much as I could for her, and then going to my room and just kind of looking around the room and seeing all the belongings that I had had, pictures from my father, who I hadn't seen in, I don't even know how long at that point. It had been a very long time. And little collectibles, the music that I would listen to, all the CDs that I'd listen to drown out the sounds of my home, and clothes. And I packed up a backpack, and that was it. I had to leave everything behind. And I took my sister to one of her friends' house, and I explained to the mom there that we were having some hard time, and asked if my sister could stay there and that I would pay her way. And she lovingly agreed, grateful for wonderful people like that. And I went and stayed behind my job at McDonald's, slept behind the dumpsters. And that led me to having to get more jobs. So I worked 3 jobs through high school. I was still trying to do great things, still had straight A's, was still set to graduate early, was captain of the cheer team. Nobody knew what was going on because I was really good about just, putting my head down and getting to work. And it would be a day of school and then cheer, and then I would go to my first job where I made sub sandwiches, and then I would go to my second job where I got changed in the bathroom and would work all night. And then I would go around the back and I would sleep behind the dumpsters so that, I had a place to stay. And then I'd wake up the next morning and I'd go shower at school and do it all over again. And then I was a hostess at Perkins on the weekends. And that went on till I was about 17. And at that point, my mom had been caught, and she went to jail for a very long time because of some of the things that happened and decisions that she made. And so at the young age of 18, I went ahead and adopted my sister. And she had some issues that required a lot of attention. And so that caused me to drop out of school to focus on her. And I spent that time just giving her what she needed. And also in that meantime, got married, and just really focused on everyone else's needs. And it was always about, making sure everyone else had their mask on before I was able to put mine on. And I throughout my, 19-year marriage, I don't know if I ever really got to put on my own mask. I was always worried about putting on everyone else's. But she's doing wonderful. She lives in California. I'm so proud of her. She's such an amazing person. And went about, life, didn't really worry about going to school. That just wasn't the focus, because as soon as she turned 18, I had a son 6 days later. And so I jumped right into, parenthood. And when I looked at him, I did look at him and say, I never want to give him a reason not to succeed, or for him to use me as an excuse. So I went and got my GED, and I was really proud about that. And then that led us to, moving around the country with my ex's job. So we lived in California and New York and Missouri. And then we did end up moving back here to Arizona. And it was about year 15 when my marriage unfortunately started to fall apart. There were decisions made from the other party that were not congruent to a healthy relationship. And that's when I think a lot of, it became very difficult, because there was no accountability, personal accountability, or personal ownership of those decisions. It was always a transfer of problems and transfer of blame, and that wore on me. And so in 2022, I made the decision to end my 19-year marriage. And that was one of the most difficult things I've ever done, because I have 3 children. And I knew that I needed to be a better example of what love was supposed to look like and the level of what is okay to tolerate from someone that you love and somebody that is supposed to love you back. And so one of the questions I had to ask myself before making that decision was, what is my limit? Where is my line? And that line had been crossed so many times, it became a blur. I just had to then make the decision to make the move and do what I needed to do. And so I did. I left in 2022, and we filed for divorce. And since then, I've been focusing on growing my business. I'm the owner of Olive Cleaning Co. We offer commercial janitorial services and residential cleaning services. I finished my bachelor's degree in business management with a 4.0. I'm pretty proud about that. Got a human resource certificate. And throughout, this time frame of being in this career, was lovingly accepted by the University of California as someone on their advisory board who audits their entrepreneurship classes. And a lot of that hard work has been rewarded, I think. And now I'm just focusing on being the very best mother I can be and focusing on giving my employees the best work environment that they can have and trying to grow a business and leave a legacy for my children.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much. I'm going to dig into this, and you can, at any point in time, you're like, I don't want to share that. That's fine. But I'm going to dig in because I want to know, not necessarily, we don't have to speak for anybody else, but what I've found in life is it's sometimes very easy to discuss factual things about what happened. And when we're talking about what happened, it allows us to be emotionally removed from it. And we can talk about what happened all the time. When we talk about how we feel about what happened, then that's more difficult because it exposes things that, maybe we don't want to talk about. So I'm going to leave it as far as how much you share is up to you, but I'm going to ask questions anyways, because that's what I think is important. So when we talk about, let's go back to kind of your mom's philosophy. And in my mind, the way that we are raised shapes who we are. And the statistical evidence is that really by the age of 8 years old, you've pretty much decided most of your identities, who you're going to be, what you're going to do. There's a scene that I often quote in Bug's Life, where in the very beginning of Bug's life, a leaf falls on the ground and all the ants are freaking out. Like, where do we go? Where's the line? And they have an older, wiser ant that rather than directing them to walk over the line or walk over the leaf or pick that leaf up and move it out of their life, they choose to go around the leaf. And these leaves that fall in our lives, these are deep traumatical experiences that disrupt the electronical, the electronic frequency of our DNA.
Right.
And your brain's job is meant to protect you. So rather than dealing with the pain, scrubbing the wound and cleaning it and removing it, your brain's job is to teach you to walk around it. And so by 8 years old, most of our life is spent avoiding our most painful moments prior to 8 years old. We've stopped trying to heal. We've started just avoiding and trying to avoid any pain. And oftentimes, as most people figure out eventually, avoiding pain leads to more pain. And it's the longer way around, right? So to that end, I want to ask some of these questions. So 13 different schools. You say your mom's philosophy was to remove you from a bad situation, just run from a bad situation. Yep. The problem with that is that you are wherever you go. So there's no way around you being where you are.
Right.
And so talk a little bit about was that ever verbally communicated to you that this is the solution? Was it just an example that was learned? What was that interaction like with your mom? I know this is all very young, prior to 14 or maybe 12 years old. What were those conversations like?
Yeah. So there were many times where it was communicated that we needed to get away from someone. And so we would sometimes leave in the middle of the night
Like
And
moving houses,
yep, moving houses. If we didn't have a house to live in, sometimes we'd go sleep in our car. Sometimes we'd go sleep in a hotel room. Yeah, it was often communicated that we were needing to get away from someone, or it was something that we needed to leave. And then sometimes it was just out of the complete blue. We were just picked up and moved.
And did you feel like going through that? What was your internal dialogue, if you remember? Were you concerned? Did you? I know that as an older child, sometimes you put on a I'm going to use a mask because we're going to bring that back up later. You put on a mask for your younger sister so that it seems fun, seems normal. Right. But in my experience, internally, that's a conscious choice. I can't trust my mom to be a leader because she's crazy. So I'm going to put on this. I'm going to now create another lens for my younger sister to view what's going on through. And those are stages of awareness. But for you, what was that internal dialogue? Like, how many questions were you asking? Were you just trusting? What was the internal dialogue there?
I learned from a very young age that even if I voiced my opinion or my concern, that it was not going to be heard. And so I remember being very sad having to leave. I just made friends, and I know all the cool spots to go hang out, in the neighborhood. And I remember many times just being very sad, but knowing that it was my role, and even though it shouldn't have been, it was my role in that family to support her, to keep her glued together, and to make sure my sister didn't fall apart. So I was kind of the middle. I was the glue. I was the grown-up in that situation, right. Always.
And so it's so fascinating that there's these two competing identities that you just spoke about. One, that if you speak, you won't be heard,
right?
Which is a lesson that I'm going to ask you about in a second here. But also at the same time, your role is the glue. Your role is the voice of reason, both to your mom. And so it's this competing thing. If you speak, you won't be heard, but also you are the one that is the reasonable voice in the room, and you are heard, and you are able to calm down or keep saying. So talk about that dichotomy a little bit.
Yep.
Why did you feel like you couldn't be heard if you actually were the only one who was the voice of reason?
There was a saying in our house that when you were done being heard, it was because I'm mom. And that was the shutdown and all. We're done with this conversation. And so when you did voice your opinion, it was because I said so and because I'm mom. And then there was the, do you understand? And you had to repeat, I understand.
Okay.
And so she definitely made sure she exemplified who was in power, but then put a lot on me to keep her together. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this decision, but I'm going to need you to be here emotionally to support me.
Okay.
And when I didn't, it affected my sister. And so.
Affected her how?
She felt uneasy, unsafe. She needed a constant. And so the only constant that could be there was me and my love for her.
So how do you, I think our childhoods are, although mine probably wasn't as unstable as yours, there's elements that were the same, right? I'm the seventh of 11 kids, grew up, thankfully, my mom and dad are still together. They love each other. All of us love each other, that I'm aware of anyways. Like there's no discord from that perspective. But there was definitely uncertainty. There was definitely a lot of that same thing where like, hey, yes, ma'am, and do it. Don't even ask why. Don't question it. And or there was physical punishment. And I don't know if your mom physically punished you, but for us, that's how we got. At some point in time, it was better to have physical punishment than the go sit in the office with dad conversation, because like that never ends, and it's just like the massest form of gaslighting. Like you have to sit here until you come up with why you're wrong. And it's like what? Anyways, so those are two different worlds, but I think we can relate on that. My question is, you now have children.
Yes.
And I now have children, and I find myself really employing a lot of those same tactics with my own children. And there's this question of like, well, is that healthy? Is that the right way of doing it? And I still am of the opinion I love how I turned out. So yeah, it's the right way, right? So
Yeah.
and I think that there's a lot of trauma that I don't even know if I would call it trauma. It's trauma when you're a child because you don't understand. But once you become an adult, then you start being responsible for your children. There is a point where it's like, you know what? Even if I tried to explain this to you, I have 30 years of experience of why this is the case. I cannot relay 30 years of experience to a 5-year-old child who's just going to keep asking why. So the answer actually is, because I said so, do it. There's no exceptions. Don't ask why. You'll figure it out. And I think that for me, I didn't discover and really give my mom and dad the grace that they deserved in those circumstances until I had my own kids. And I was like, you're right. You have all this knowledge, all this information as an adult, all this experience. And at the end of the day, none of it is relative to your child because they don't understand. And they're like, for them to understand pain, for them to understand certain things, it's like, it's not going to happen. But if we don't teach them that there's actual boundaries, and sometimes you do just have to listen, sometimes you have to do it first, then I feel like that actually has damaged our society when we've swung the pendulum so far from the not being heard to the everybody's voice matters. And if you want to pretend you're a little animal at 6 years old, then we should get you a litter box. I think that's the whole, like, what the hell's going on? And so I'm just curious from your perspective, now that you're an adult, now you have children, how do you balance that act? Because now you're in your mom's role, doing better, more kind, more loving, more aware. But how do you balance teaching those valuable lessons in a more healthy way?
I love that question. Thank you. So I remember in the midst of the most difficult moments when I was raising my sister, I said to her something that I have thought about almost every day of my life since. She was having a very hard time, and she was frailing about and punching and kicking and crying. And I wrapped my arms around her and I said, I'm not going anywhere. So you can push me away all you want. I'm staying. And I pulled her back and I said, Ashley, at some point you have to make the decision to use everything you've been through as an excuse to keep making the decisions you're making, or as a reason to be better. And I think that's that fork in the road, right? We can use it as an excuse or a reason. And for me, I'm lucky enough to say that I made very, very conscious decisions to take the road less traveled by in my side of the family, break the cycle. And I am so grateful for the example that my mother was, because she showed me the type of mother that I did not want to be. Mm-hmm. And so I have taken that other road with my children. Yes, there are moments where they're not going to understand. And instead of saying, because I said so, I take the approach, why does mom give you rules? Why does mom make these decisions? And they know there are reasons. And they will always respond with, to keep us safe and to keep us healthy. So know that if mom says something and I'm not going to give an explanation, that it is going to fall within one of those two realms. It is to keep you safe or to keep you healthy. And, with that, why can't I have cookies for dinner? Mm-hmm. Well, mom said no. And why do I say no? To keep us safe or to keep us healthy. So they know. And I feel like I take a philosophy as well with life that you'll catch more bees with honey. And I think the same goes with children. I was yelled at and cursed at and beaten and put down and almost into submission, right? For fear. I don't do that with my kids because I think that they are these beautiful creatures that God blessed me with, and I want to do my very best with them. And so I talk to them kindly and I use nice words with them. And don't get me wrong, I have yelled, but it is not my go-to.
You've never yelled, Tasha. Your programming from your 8 never peaks out.
It's definitely not my go-to. And so And I don't know if I would have been this type of mom had I not had that example. And so I can look at her and say I'm so grateful because now my kids are going to have a great mom.
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know where I land on the scale of it. I'm personally, I still spank my kids, but like for me, it's like this gradation of, okay, where's the line?
Yeah.
I got spanked with a lot of objects or hit with like a lot of things that were not great, that were actual, I think, harmful. And so like my line is I'm going to use my hand, right? Because my hand, I know how hard it hurts my hand, and it doesn't feel good to either of us, you getting spanked. Nobody wants to do this, but also, is my hand less damaging than a car if you don't learn the rules of the road?
Right.
And you don't understand boundaries, and you don't understand that you may not always understand why somebody wants you to do something.
Right.
But you don't get to ask why. Why will get you in not good situations sometimes.
Right.
Not always, right? Sometimes why is a really good question. So anyways, I'm just curious because we both came from very similar outcomes. When I was about 14 years old is when I finally emancipated myself. You had a different scenario as far as how that happened for you. Yeah. But both ironically came from our parents leaving for a month or so. I think it was we were just talking about, I think it was 3.5 weeks. My parents and my oldest brother went to France for a month and left all of us kids home to fend for ourselves with a pile of money. Like it was very planned out. Again, not even remotely the same situation you had. We knew where they were. They called us. Like it was not like an abandonment type of scenario.
Right.
However, we were raised to be very independent children. And then there was still a desire to have a lot of control as the mom.
Right.
For her own sanity, I'm sure. I'm not, again, now as a parent, I'm like, I get it. I'm not, there's no shade anywhere. Yeah. But at the time I didn't get it. And I was like, look, either you can control everything I do, or you can give me control of everything I do and I'll get the things done I need to, but I'm not doing the halvesies anymore. So that wasn't working for me. And I think that was one of the best things that ever happened for my mom and I's relationship when there was a recognition that she didn't need to be the overseer of my life anymore. And that like release of that responsibility actually improved our relationship. But it came from being accountable, being somebody who said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do what I say. I do what I say. I'm going to work for my own income, things there. So I'm curious, when your mom leaves for a month,
yep,
you have no idea where she is. This isn't the first time. I mean, multiple times when I was growing up, again, not that my mom would leave sometimes, just like get in the car and drive away for a week or 2 weeks. It seemed like it may have only been 2 or 3 days, but it seemed like a week or 2 weeks. Yeah. And there were times where my mom would lock the house and we'd come home and there was just a sign on the door that's like, hey, go find somewhere to stay because you're not staying here. And we would have to go to our friend's house and say, hey, can we camp out here for a week? Like, well, isn't your house just over there? Yeah, but we can't go home right now. Why? Just, we can't. Can we just, because the one thing that we all learned was how to lie really well, how to pretend that what's going on is not happening. So let's go forward really quick and I might go backward. But you mentioned that you've spent your whole life kind of putting on other people's masks first. And I want to challenge that because I don't think it's true. I think it's a lie to say that. And you're like, no, Sam, I did. I spent my whole life. Okay. but I would say that the way that you masked all of your own pain was using other people as your mask, pretending that everything you learned at a young age, how to always have a mask on so that nobody knows what's really going on. I learned the same lesson, right? Like by the time I was 12, 13, 14 years old, like even if I got hit or beat or bruised or anything, I was never going to say anything happened at my house. I know instantly you make up the coolest story about what happened and it's never going to happen from your parents. It's never going to happen at home. That's not where crap happens because CPS got called on our family multiple times growing up. Like we learned from a very young age, the crap doesn't leave, And so I would say that you put on that mask early and that mask lasted a long time. So my question, I guess, is when did you realize that you were masking your own pain, and that you're now coming aware, because you learn the lesson early on that if I speak, I'm not heard.
Right.
But there's no way that you don't carry that into your relationship. And then 15 years in, maybe that's when you realize, man, I still am not being heard. Or maybe you realize it sooner. I'm just curious, like, at what point do you realize that this mask of I'm going to pretend everything's okay, I'm just going to make everything okay because I can do that, it's my control, I can make things okay. When does that come into play and marry the fact that, man, I'm still not being heard, I'm still not being treated the way I want to? Right. Yes, I can make everything's okay. And now the way of making everything's okay means to acknowledge that I haven't been okay. And that's the hardest part sometimes, is people acknowledging, I haven't been okay. I've been pretending to be okay, but I'm not okay. So talk about that circumstance. Like what was happening? What was happening in your relationship that 15 years in, you start to come to this realization? Because you stayed in for 4 more years, right? You didn't just like, oh shit, I'm in prison, this sucks. You just like, I'm going to camp out in prison for 4 more years and see if I can make prison tenable. And it's like, no, at what point do you like, I'm pushing back here because I want to know, people need to know these, although not everybody's in an abusive relationship with their spouse, most people are in an abusive relationship with something, whether it's their phone, Netflix, their health, whatever it is. They don't know how to say enough is enough. And saying enough is enough has to acknowledge that what's been happening, all the crap we've been lying to people about, actually wasn't good. And that's an ego thing. So I just want to know, like, what was going on? How did that come to the point where it's like, I got to figure this out?
I think there were moments in life. So right before I got custody of my sister, I realized I'm still hurting from all of this. And that took me on a path of discovering faith. And I sought counseling. I thought to myself, how on earth can I help her through what she's dealing with and her feelings with our mother if I still have feelings? And so I did do counseling for a while and tried to work through how I was feeling about that and about her. And then I realized at a certain point, because I didn't grow up with religion in my home, the only time the Lord's name was mentioned was when it was in vain. That was my religious experience as a child.
Better something than nothing, right?
I did realize at a certain point that I could not have hate and love in my heart at the same time. And that was a paradigm moment for me when I realized that I was carrying a lot of hate and disguising it with, just everything's great, everything's good. When I learned that I couldn't have both of those things, I chose love. And I chose forgiveness. And that was not an easy thing. Recognizing that in myself, because I thought I was this nice person. I thought I do all these good things for everybody else, but then realizing that I truly was very angry inside. So I turned everything I couldn't control over to God and discovered faith and learned to put a lot in his hands. And that freed up so much of my soul. I did go from, living behind my job to living with my ex-husband's family and then getting married. And so I think I formed a trauma bond with him a little bit. And how he treated me is not all his fault. And that's taken me a long time to discover too. I taught him what was okay and how to treat me. So I recognize that by him never trying to put me first or acknowledge my needs was because I was so used to just taking care of everybody else and not worrying about myself. I did teach a behavior there. And so part of that is my fault. That took me a lot of counseling to come to too.
Proud of you. I mean, that's hard. Those are the hard things to admit. Because people, I don't love fault. I don't know that that's a word that I like to use ever. But I would say it was your creation. you had a part in creating that.
Yeah.
And to acknowledge that it's the most damning thing and also the most freedom thing to recognize, like, oh, I created this. I can now go create something else.
Yes.
I can create whatever I want once you realize that you were the one who created.
Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong. He had his own choices and made a lot of bad ones. And I hold responsibility there. But I can recognize that I could have done things a little different that would have allowed me to be treated differently.
And so what happens 15 years in that you're finally saying, okay, this isn't the way I want to go? Because we talked about other mentors that you had earlier in to this process. I mean, 2004 is when you're talking about. That's 20 years ago. Yeah. And so that's when you're how I thought you were only like 35 or something. So
you're so sweet. Now I'm turning 38 this year.
38. Still, you're young. So 2004, you're 18. I mean, you're 18. So you had good mentors, Ed Milet, Jamie Viola. Like, you had good connections. You were surrounded by people who, I mean, although they aren't today who they were then, right? They were still growing and developing 20 years ago. They've come a long way, but you had great people around you. Yeah. That helped support something powerful. Yeah. What was happening 15 years ago that helped you make that paradigm shift?
The paradigm shift.
15 years into your marriage. About 6 years ago, sounds like.
So actually, it was 2022. So we'd been married 18 years, I suppose, 18 and a half years. So my ex had an affair.
Okay.
And she was much, much, much younger than me. Almost the age of our marriage. Okay. And that was a line for me. So it was the day before my son turned 2 that I found this out. And that day, I asked him to go to a very sacred place, and we spoke about it, and he confessed everything to me. And again, I put on the needs of someone else so that I didn't have to feel what I was feeling, and said, it's our son's birthday tomorrow. I'm going to go pick him out a birthday present. If you'd like, you can come. And I had to just focus on someone else to get through what I was dealing with. And so we picked out a gift for our son. He came to the birthday party the next day, and I told him I was going to leave him.
This is in 2022 though, right?
This is in 2019.
2019? Okay.
2019. And he laughed at me, and he said, you've been a stay-at-home mom for 12 years. How are you ever going to leave me? And he was right. I went on multiple interviews. I got the jobs, but they're offering me $17 an hour. That is not enough money.
In California, which is nothing.
We were living here in Arizona, actually. Yep. And that was not enough money to support my family. He was right. And so I said to myself, I'm going to spend this time to this time. So I gave myself a time frame. I said, I'm going to give myself until my son turns 5. And I'm going to give him as much forgiveness that I can and give him an opportunity to fix this. Because, you make a commitment to someone, you want to uphold that and do your best to keep a family together. And I said, but in that time frame, I will never feel stuck again. And so that's when I finished my degree. And that's when I started my business. And I scaled it to now where it's something where I get to bless other people in that situation, which brings me so much joy. And I'm able to take care of my kids by myself.
Yeah, I think that's huge. That is, like, we talked about this story a little bit before the podcast, and it's why I want to do not why I want to do the podcast, but like one of the things, because my mission in life, fuel your legacy, like the whole thing is not about the legacy as much as the fuel. Like, what are you doing to fuel your legacy? What is the thing that needs to happen there? And fuel could be looked at as your why, like the reason you're doing it, but you had a driving reason. But also, like, most people, the reason they don't live the life they want to is because they don't either have the time or the resources, and or they don't know that they have the time or the resources. And so some people think, oh man, I'm already so busy. I'm a full-time mom. I can't do this. Well, look, Tasha decided her circumstances demanded that she find an extra 3 or 4 hours and better herself and create a circumstance where she could win. And every one of us has that same option. We all have that same choice of, are we going to be committed, or are we going to be interested? Are we going to be absolutely in, or are we going to say, when it's convenient? Well, at some point, it becomes more convenient to figure your life out so you have some independence than to remain in a situation you're not being treated and respected the way that you want to. And so that's one element of, why I wanted to have this conversation. And then the other element is my life purpose. I studied neuropsychology specifically to figure out how could I help people outside of anxiety, depression, domestic violence, addictions, divorce. How could I help people receive the fullness that they could? And a lot of that came down to financial literacy. Even though Tasha had worked with people who are now, and they were then still, but they were getting started then, but now they're financial giants. She knows these people who are very good at money, have very good successful careers, and yet due to choices that she made 20 years ago and the difference of those lives, just because you knew something, if you are not consistently applying it, then you get to the point where maybe the market, if you believe the marketplace is only going to offer you $17 an hour, then that's what you're worth. And it wasn't that Tasha was ever only worth $17 an hour, but if that's what she believed she was worth and the jobs that she could get, then that's where it was, until she said, I'm going to go to work and make this happen. So financial literacy is an absolute passion of mine, to help people exactly like in situations similar to yours, so that nobody has to remain in a situation they don't want to be in.
Yeah.
I'm going to just, again, you can answer these questions however you want, and I'm happy to share my experiences, not in any form of justification or anything other than to share a perspective from man's perspective. I'm not saying it's right. I recognized it was a wrong perspective immediately. Like, I'm not sitting here saying that it was all okay, but it is interesting. So I'm just curious, when he decided to make those choices and participate in behavior that was outside the bounds of what your agreed upon relationship was, what was the initial feeling of that? And also, I'm just, not that there's ever a justification, but I'm curious, like, what was his perspective of how that occurred or why that occurred?
Well, and this is where he, my feelings on it, I felt betrayed. I gave up big career goals that I had to support him in his career and follow him all around the United States and become secluded and isolated for very long periods of time just so I could support him. I gave him 3 beautiful children, most of which were over 9 pounds, all the way up to 11 pounds.
Big baby.
And his justification was that I was not pretty enough, or my body did not look the way he wanted it to. It was always, well, I wouldn't do this if you looked better.
So
I wouldn't make these
gaslighting
choices.
And diminishing value of the circumstance.
Yeah. Because he couldn't call on anything about me being a mom. If there was one thing I was confident about, it was, I'm a good mom. Our house was always perfect, but he'd come home, and if I had been, with the kids all day and doing homework and, running around and doing school projects, but if I hadn't showered to look really good for him when he got home, I had not succeeded in anything else throughout the day. Well, you couldn't do the one thing I asked you to, which is look good when I come home. But I did this and this and this and this. It doesn't matter. I didn't ask you to do those things. I asked you for one thing.
Yeah, just ignore our children. Yeah, okay.
It was always turned back on me. And I started to believe it. Yeah. And when I recognized that I was starting to believe that I wasn't enough, I had to make myself become enough. I had to grab down that mask with that oxygen and put it on and say, I love everyone around me, but I need to start taking care of myself because I'm losing myself.
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I believe that there's more people experiencing those types of comments, those types of experiences with their spouses on both sides of the spectrum, men and women. I mean, I think it happens on both sides, that those types of things come up and they're being treated that way. And again, the sad part for me is that eventually somebody believes it.
Yeah.
That eventually somebody gets gaslit enough that's what it is. And maybe it's not gaslit. Maybe the guy actually feels that way. In which case, that's a good sign that you're just not a good fit, right? Like, I'm not, and that's where I think, like, I'm not a proponent of divorce, but I'm not against it either if that's where it's at, right? I know when my wife and I were dating, it was our first date ever. She had asked, like, anyways, there's a lot on this date that happened, but after like 4 hours of talking about all of our frustrations about dating, very, very frank conversation, we were walking back to the car, and Charlie was getting brave at this point as far as what questions she was willing to ask me. And I don't have much of a filter. I'm getting better, but it's not great. And so she asked me, like, well, what type of guy are you? Like, are you a boobs or a butt guy? And I was like, because I now know what she looks like. and my previous experiences with the female body was basically pornography, which is not really accurate anyway. So like I knew anything about what I was saying? Not really. But but again, the reason I bring this up and the reason I share these things is not for anything about myself, but to help other people recognize these are things that are happening in our world. They're part of our lived experience. And if we ignore them and we pretend that they're not there, then it only causes further pain. Yeah. And so at the time, so she asked me, I was like, well, how honest do you want me to be right now? And she's like, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, do you want me to tell you what you want to hear? Or do you want to tell me like how I actually feel? Because I can water it down and you'll feel great, or I can tell you what's the truth. And my wife is more busty and less butt. That's basically what my wife looks like, which is great for me now. But at the time I was like, yeah, I don't know, maybe like size B boob and a bubble butt. Like that would be my preference based on what I've seen, which I have no experience with, but based on what I've seen. And then I said, clearly that's not you, right? We both know that that's not you. But physical appearance for me is only 30% of the equation of whether I want to get married to somebody, right? And I mean, you have to that's a first date conversation, guys, like with my wife and I. So this is not like, who is this guy? He's not very kind. He just basically told you he's not like mega sexually attracted to you or whatever. Like, why would you want to go on another date with this person? Which is, fair. If that's how it ended, I'm glad it didn't end that way, but if that's how it ended, whatever. But I had learned that I was better off being honest. I was better off sharing my truth, and for the right person, it was going to work out. And that's been kind of like a hallmark of our relationship, because every woman, when you have children, bodies change. And so as her body's changed over the years, because she's somewhat stuck in what the world believes a beautiful woman is, then she'll be like, how can you really think I'm attractive? You must be lying to yourself. I'm like, no, like that was not part of that wasn't the main factor for me. And when I was choosing a wife. And so I do think you're beautiful at every stage that you've been in. I do appreciate your body in every stage that you've been in. I think stretch marks are crazy cool. Like, anyways, like I just like, for me, I'm okay with all those stuff, but being able to have those conversations, I think is crucial, to have honest conversations. And if it is something like your situation, I'm not justifying what he did at all, but I think it's important that if you're getting that type of feedback, I think that's a good indicator. Like, you're probably better off not together than to continue to have your soul destroyed.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion.
I think that if there was one piece of advice I could give to anyone who is dating or whatnot, it was don't ignore the red flags in the beginning, because they will become the reasons why you will not be together later on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's just a fascinating thing. So I appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing those things, because it's not true. Like I shouldn't say it's not true. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? And so if the person says whatever, then they're going to say that. I can say that it's been fascinating to me to see the reasons in my own life. I'm not a perfect person, and I don't pretend to be. But in my own life, the times that I never understood this person or why they would do something, and then once you get put in certain circumstances, certain mindsets start to make sense, or like you can at least track how somebody thinks, and that's a weird thing to realize the humanness in all of us. Like, even though you may think I would never do that, the moment you think I would never do that and you start judging somebody else for doing that, I feel like it's not too far away before you experience their mindset. And then you're like, oh, okay.
I have definitely learned a lot of things going through a divorce. And let me tell you, I would be very different with anyone going through that as well.
Yeah.
Like not ignoring them, giving them love, treating them like a human.
Yeah. So like, it's just, why did you get divorced? Why didn't you work harder? Why didn't you, like, there's all these things. It's like the moment you start throwing shade or energy, negative energy to a certain thing, I feel like it's God's habit to just be like, I need to show you the other side of this coin, because a big part of my life, at least, is learning how to experience more charity and grace and compassion for people. And a lot of that compassion comes from understanding,
right?
And that's how Christ gained it, in my opinion. Christ came down, he experienced a lot of crap, so that he could know how to succor us, know how to be compassionate, know how to be graceful with the things that we experience.
Yeah. I've definitely learned that, one, I am grateful not to have the job of judge. It is not my place, and that is a hard job that I am so glad I don't have to have. But learning and this journey thus far in life has taught me how to love someone even when they hurt you, but it doesn't mean you have to accept what's happening to you. It's okay to establish boundaries for yourself, and it's okay if you have to move forward with the things that you say you're going to do when those boundaries are crossed. They're so important. Mm-hmm. Boundaries are important. Even Jesus had boundaries. So I thought for the longest time, especially when I started turning everything over, that to be Christ-like, it meant that I had to forgive everyone and I had to just accept it. And I just had to, give everyone and treat everyone well. And I learned very quickly that he spoke his mind when something was not right. And in fact, I wasn't being Christ-like. I had mistaken what that term meant and shorted myself on the ability to speak up.
Yeah.
For myself.
There's a lot of people, again, nobody knows this other than people who have heard me say it, but not everybody knows it. One of my dreams is to, speak in the Georgia Dome. And if I got to share my heart's message with the world, it would be about, for me, the elimination of forgiveness out of my life and the acceptance of grace and gratitude. Because I think that if more people looked at life through a lens of growth, then they would be more loving and compassionate towards others. And that's what I would want to share with everybody in the world at any point in time. Like, how do we be more like that? And I think that the Christ-like thing comes up because there's also false humility, where, just like what we've been talking about, you put on your own mask, pretending that everything's okay, pretending that you're humble, but you take that everything being okay as a badge of honor. Like, hey, everything's okay. I got through a lot of stuff and everything's okay, rather than recognizing the actual pain that exists.
I think it is healthier for things to not be okay all the time. I think that's okay.
Yeah. Well, we were playing games last night, or I don't know, a few nights ago. And my wife was talking about when she was a teller at the bank. And if your till is off, which it's off almost every other day or every day by a few cents or a few dollars or whatever, nothing gets counted perfectly, then that's okay. Banks have a slush fund for that. Christ has a slush fund for all of our misgivings, right? But if you're like statistically, if your till is on every time, too many days in a row, then that's when people start thinking you're stealing, because that's not normal. It's not normal to have perfect reports. It's not normal to have this perfect thing. It's actually more normal to have inconsistency. And so when there's absolute consistency, that's a red flag, right? When there is consistency, when there's not like,
I agree.
I don't know, what does this guy like me? Does this guy not like me? Like, I'd rather deal with somebody who is like, I don't know where, not complete bipolar, right? You don't want somebody who's like lying to you all the time. But if somebody is perfect all the time, that's when I would be like, I don't know. Everything's too perfect. Everything doesn't like, something doesn't add up. It doesn't, I don't know what's going on at home, but I've been in a home that everything was perfect on the outside and not on the inside. So like,
I totally agree.
so like, I'm like, when things get too good, that's when I'm like, nah, that's not life for me. Something needs to be better. So man, I have more notes, but we're going to run out of time here. So the big question that you got out of, like, if you were to wrap up kind of your experience thus far, what would be 2 or 3 questions you think everybody would value asking themselves, that they may come to different answers, different conclusions, but the question is what helped you make the transformations you needed to?
I think it's very important in business and in personal life. What is your end goal? Where do you want to end up? And then, business and life has taught us we have to work backwards from that, right? Whether it's financials or, business or fitness goals, it's applicable to everything. What is your end goal? So that would be my first question I would ask. And I would ask, what do my weaknesses require of me? Where do I know that I'm lacking, and what do I need to focus on? And you got to do the hard things. If you don't do the hard things, you never improve. You can't keep working on the things you're good at. So what do my weaknesses require of me? And am I proud of who I am? I think most importantly, would my kids be proud of who I am? So
how old, I love that last one. How old's your oldest?
16 years old, all boys. 16.
So that's a whole nother fascinating thing, man. I'm looking at the clock. Like, do I dive in? I'm going to. Do you have a few more minutes? I want to know the answer. Okay, so when you're asking that question, like, are my kids going to be proud of who I am? Are they proud of who I am?
Yeah.
Something that's fascinating in divorce situations is, there's always 2 sides to every story. Then there's the truth about what happened in the middle. And then you have your kids' perceptions. At what point, because there's maybe you're proud of who you are as a mother, but maybe not showing up the way you want to be in a relationship and you want to give them a good example. At what point do they start recognizing that you are either out of integrity or maybe, I don't want to say intentionally being mistreated, because that's maybe not the right word, but you haven't quite left the situation because there's a belief in society that it's better if you stay together. It's better if you figure it out. It's better if there's a two-parent household. That better love if you get to stay with the mom and dad and raise the family together. And there's a lot of people, I mean, statistics are astounding, honestly, that women age 55 plus are the highest filing divorce cohort in America. So it's like,
because the kids are all grown.
No, it's really that. After the kids have grown, that's when they say, I'm finally out. And because there's this belief that it's better to have your children be raised in a marriage, right? But I think I'm not an idiot, right? I feel like I was aware pretty young that things were not good in my household.
Oh.
Even if on the face it looks good, kids understand energy, or at least they feel energy, even if they don't know what's going on. They know. And so, like, your son, he's 16, but he probably knew when he was 10, he probably knew when he was 9 that things were not okay. And so at what point does staying in a marriage actually cause more bad example than saying, hey, no, I'm actually going to remove myself? So, and how do you then transfer that to the children? Because in a lot of cases, better or worse, when they're sides picking and villainizing of the other spouse, then it's like, it just gets messy. So how did that happen? How did that deal with in your own family?
So unfortunately, the things that happened to me were very public. They were done in front of our children. So they did see and they did hear. There was a pivotal moment for me where he said something to me about how I looked, and it made me sad, and I started to cry. And he said to me, he said, "Can you go in the other room and act like an adult, compose yourself, and when you can stop crying, come talk to me like an adult." And so I walked into the other room, and my son followed me. And he said, "Mom, I just want you to know I'm never going to treat my wife that way." And that for me was, they see, they hear. And it's not that I was worried about them thinking I was weak. I was worried that I have 3 sons here that need a good example. And while I think individually he's a good man, we were not being good together.
Sure.
I knew that they were seeing things that they shouldn't see. I didn't want them to emulate the things that were happening in their fathers and my marriage. I didn't want them to be like that. And so that was definitely a big deciding moment. I promised myself that when I left, it would not be an emotional decision. We were okay. Mm-hmm. We were getting along. I was in the middle of, I came back and he had love bombed me, which is what kept me there for so long, because it would be really bad and I'd say, "I'm done." And then he'd love bomb me for a certain amount of time. And then I'd think, okay, I can keep doing this. It's not as bad as I think. And then it would get bad again. And that was the cycle for all of the years we were together.
That's an abusive cycle for you listening, guys. Yeah. That's happening in your relationship.
It wasn't good. And if it keeps happening again and again, it's not going to ever stop.
Right.
But when I did decide to leave, I sat them down. We actually sat them down together. And we let them know we love each other. We're just not good together. And I think that we're going to be better parents for you guys separately. And I've made it a promise that I don't speak poorly of their father in front of them. I think that he is a good dad and he loves his children and they love him. And I don't ever want to ruin that. Now, what he does and says and is, I no longer am trying to cover up.
Right.
And maybe that's important too. I used to try and pretend, like, even to the kids, like I would do with my sister, everything's okay, don't worry, look over here, look over here.
Yeah, he didn't mean that. He's really just kidding. It's like, no.
Yes, exactly. I no longer make excuses for him. I no longer make excuses for anyone in my life. I let them be accountable for their own decisions, and that is freeing. Yeah,
and it's free. It's freeing when you get to do that for yourself and not make excuses for yourself either, and say, okay, this is the thing. So, man, thank you so much. We got into a lot today. I appreciate you being so open and vulnerable, and sharing the things that are inside, that are more than just the circumstances, but the thoughts and feelings about them. But I really believe that that's where there's a lot of people who are struggling in that experience. Yesterday was my wife and I's 8-year anniversary. And
happy anniversary.
And one of the things that we were fortunate to have, just because of habits, was we journaled pretty much most of our dating experience. And so I've been working on this gift for her for like 3 years, and it still wasn't finished, but I finally was like, I just need to give you it a little bit. I tried to lift off all the text of our journals and not scrapbook them, but turn it into an actual book with pictures of what we were doing and the experiences we had. But it's fascinating to go back and read through those initial experiences and the thoughts and the feelings and understanding who we are. One of the things I did when I was dating my wife, because I'd been journaling since I was 8 years old, almost daily, a few times missing it, but almost daily, is when we were dating, I said, hey, here's my journals. I want you to read these, like all the crap, all the things that like everything that I've ever done that I'm not proud of that's in my journals. I want you to read it because I want you to have a full, as full of representation of who I am, all the good, the bad, and the ugly, that I am. And when she asked me when we were dating, like, what are you looking for in a wife? And I was like, honestly, somebody who can accept me. Like, that's wonderful. Like, I'm not too picky, right? Like, I know I'm not perfect. I assume nobody else I marry is going to be perfect. I'm not looking for anybody perfect. I'm looking for somebody who can handle the fact that I'm not perfect and is willing to grow with me, because I'm trying to grow. I'm trying to be better, but I know I'm not there. And if the standard is to be perfect before you ever get married, I'm never getting there. And two, anybody who thinks they are, they're going to be severely disappointed when they find out that this person they married was a human as well, and they have human tendencies. And you're like, oh, that sucks. So I really, really appreciate you being open, vulnerable, sharing your story. I'm excited for the chance to meet you in person and to speak at the same event with you here in a few weeks, and potentially use your company. We'll see how that goes. In a little tiff with my cleaners right now. I'll explain that later. But yeah, I'm just so grateful. If somebody wanted to follow you, get to know more about you, or learn from you, if they're in Arizona, be part of your company, where would they go? Where would they interact with you best?
You can find me on Facebook. My name is Tasha Skousen. You can find me on Instagram. It is at I am Tasha Skousen. And those are the best places to get a hold of me, for sure.
Okay. And then we'll wait for the movie of your life.
I wonder who will get to play it.
Eagerly anticipating the movie of your life. I love a good comeback story. We need
There are big things in store.
Yeah.
Big things are happening.
That's so cool. I love it. Well, thank you so much again, and we'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy show.
Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me, and if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.